जी बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। President OICCI Yusuf Hussain Saab, the board there, all the distinguished delegates, especially all the participants and delegates who have come from various parts of the world. A very special welcome to all of you on a topic which is not only timely, but one of the most critical and what I have called existential issues for Pakistan. So thank you for being here. My sincere apologies for not being there in person because of various commitments here in Islamabad, but it's good to at least join virtually. देखिए ये the whole thing about climate and climate change, all the subject matter experts are sitting here, and what I saw in terms of the speaker lineup, all of you and all of us are in wild agreement that Pakistan is indeed one of the most vulnerable countries in the world with respect to climate and climate change. The 2022 flooding and floods, in some sense, were a real awakening for Pakistan. And as you well know, when the Secretary General of UN visited Pakistan, he called it climate carnage. That's the word that he used. And since then, it's all about rescue, rehabilitation, reconstruction, 4RF, everything that we talked about. Now, in terms of institutional arrangements, so before we go there, of course, as a country, we need to do what we need to do with respect to emissions. But for us as a country, and I'm sure the speakers here who have talked about it and others who are going to be there tomorrow, for us it's less about mitigation, and we do need to play our role and due role on the mitigation side. But it's mostly about adaptation. So I think that is generally what we agree on as well. Now then, in terms of institutional arrangements, we have a national adaptation plan. I've been there in terms of coalition of finance ministers of climate change. We were there in COP29 in Baku with respect to B20 and working on climate prosperity plan. I'm sure whenever the Minister for Climate Change, she is going to join you, I'm sure she will deliberate and elaborate on that as well. So all of those institutional arrangements are in place. And even with respect to our PSDP, there are a number of things which we go through in terms of checking the boxes around climate and climate change. We have the NDCs, so that's also sort of moving in the right direction in terms of our net zero ambition and where we want to go with everything around this space. Now, I've always said, whether in my capacity as the finance minister or even when I was in the private sector and very much all the corporate leaders were sitting there in your role, that there is no dearth of policy prescriptions in Pakistan. We have known the what and why for the longest time. It's almost always about the how part of it. Always about the how part of it. How do we get it done? So with adaptation, what are we doing around adaptation? And first of all, we can focus on the financing part of it, and then we can also discuss the projects which we need to bring through. So in terms of financing, what I have seen over the last sort of whatever 10 to 11 months in my current role, and even when I was in the private sector. Let's go back to the 22 discussion and the pledges in Geneva. There was no dearth of financing, right? I mean, we came back with more than $9 billion of pledges, but those were not grants. Those were project financings. And we had to come up with investable, bankable projects so that we can take that through, right? So the ball was very much in our court, and that's where the capacity building part comes in. And I just want to link it in with many other things that we are trying to do in terms of capacity building. Green Climate Fund, number of banks and a few institutions have joined them. When I was there in COP29, with due respect to Green Climate Fund and their management and their sponsors, I said, we are very bureaucratic, but please cut down the bureaucracy in Manila. Right? It cannot be year, 2 year, 3 year things when you have your institutions who have applied trying to get accredited. That's Green Climate Fund for you. So therefore, and the same thing about loss and damage fund. It was in Sharm el Sheikh that came through. And then in Dubai, we talked about in COP28, how we're going to operationalize it. So I do think there's the whole committee of nations pledged and what has been already agreed to streamline it and to fast track it in terms of operationalization. Now, these are some of the things which we are obviously engaged in. When you hear the Minister for Climate Change, I'm sure she will do a much better job than I'm doing in terms of, what we need to do on, in terms of operationalizing some of these things, whether it's V20, and I talked about the Climate Prosperity Fund, because that's also an element and a mechanism through which we are going to take things forward. Now, how do we take it and make it frontline and bring it into the thinking and what we are trying to do at the government level? And I'll come back into the private sector discussion in a moment as well. Now, when I met President Ajay Banga back in April, and at that point in time, we were just concluding the 9-month SBA on the fund side, and we were getting into an EFF discussion that we want a larger and a longer program with the fund. At that point in time, when I met President Banga, I mentioned two existential issues for the country. One was population, and the other was climate. And while we are very much focused in terms of the immediate revival of the economy, and alhamdulillah, we are in a good place with respect to macroeconomic stability. You heard the State Bank discussions yesterday in terms of where we are, in terms of policy rate coming down, FX reserves going to $13 billion by the end of June, etc. So we are moving in the right direction there. But ultimately, it's about the future of the country, because when we talk about the World Bank studies, where are we going to be in 2047 before we get into a $3 trillion economy? We need to get into $1 trillion economy. But we need to focus on some of the existential issues. So I'll come back to climate in a moment. But I said to him, population and climate. And within population, child stunting. If 40% of the children in Pakistan under the age of 5 are afflicted with child stunting and learning poverty, girls out of school, that's the future of Pakistan. We have a huge issue if we are not investing there. And then climate and climate resiliency. So climate resiliency, whether it's agriculture related, whether it's water management, Decarbonization, these are two issues which have been brought up in the country partner framework. Those of you who have been in Lahore in December, you know exactly what we mean by decarbonization and air pollution. Now, these are the elements through which we get their help, we get Asian Development Bank's help, we get UNDP as helping us in terms of the executing agency, because it's not about financing and funding. Because I genuinely believe we have ample sources of funding and financing, even before we come to the green finance. And the green finance, of course, as you know, WADA had issued a green bond three and a half years back. At that point in time, they printed $500 million. The book size was $3 billion. So it was 6 times oversubscribed at that point in time. And inshallah, as we go back into the international capital markets, we'll go back and start tapping the green bond market again. और उसी में जो enabling framework है, कि जो green taxonomy है, and with State Bank taking the lead, inshallah by March, April, we will have a clear green taxonomy framework for Pakistan, so that we can all agree that what means green in terms of projects, in terms of structuring, in terms of funding, in terms of monitoring, and in terms of reporting. Because I genuinely believe कि जो Geneva के pledges वापस नहीं आए हमारे मुल्क में, वो इस वजह से नहीं आए कि we did not have projects which could measure up to this type of international scrutiny. So we need to build that type of capacity in the country, ताकि जो funding or financing जिसको pledge किया जाता है, that actually flows in terms of adaptation finance. And so the last thing I just want to mention, because IMF के सिलसिले में काफी बात होती है, of course we are going to get our sort of first 6-monthly review in terms of where we are in terms of the EFF. But this is also going to be a moment where we are going to get into a more detailed discussion with the fund in terms of the climate resiliency facility. So in February, when the team arrives, we are going to go there. So as you can see, all the foreign delegates who are here, the local participants who are here, my clear view is financing, funding is less of an issue. The homework is rests with us in Pakistan. And that's where I want to leave this discussion, that as far as the government is concerned, whether it's Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Climate Change, Ministry of Finance, of course we all come together. You have seen Udan Pakistan, you have seen the overall program which has been unveiled. But ultimately, I will come back to what I have been saying all along. And that's where Overseas Chamber and the leading international investors, the leading local investors, all of them who are there with Overseas Chamber, is the private sector which has to lead the country. And the private sector will lead the country in terms of the business revival, inshallah. And it's the private sector which is also going to come up with bankable, investable projects, because that's what we need. That's what we need. Funding आ जाएगी, financing आ जाएगी, लेकिन जब तक हम ऐसे projects नहीं लाएंगे जिनको international scrutiny पे हम आगे लेकर जाएं, ये मामला आगे नहीं चल सकेगा. तो हमारी जो सारा focus होना चाहिए, and यूसुफ हुसैन साहब, मैंने आपकी तवज्जुह से I would like to request कि अगला जो दिन and a day and a half that you're going to spend with all the experts that you have in the room, how can we build capacity around that particular aspect? That would be my request to you as we go forward. Once again, I'm very grateful for the kind invitation. I don't want to, I think I'm almost on time because I was allocated 20 minutes. I don't want to take more time than what is allocated to me. But I wish you a very successful conference, and I look forward to getting the recommendations back from this very august forum in terms of any recommendations where the government and certainly Ministry of Finance can help, support, assist. Thank you again for the very kind invitation.